History has a way of playing favorites. We all know the Roman Empire, the Mongols, the British Empire, names etched into textbooks and echoed in pop culture. But what about the empires that shaped our world, only to vanish from the collective memory? Picture this: vast kingdoms, thriving cities, and mighty rulers who once commanded the respect of millions, now reduced to footnotes in forgotten scrolls. These were civilizations that built wonders, pioneered innovations, and forged legacies until time turned them into whispers. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 30 of these lost giants, empires so powerful they once ruled the world, yet so overlooked they barely register in modern conversations. Think about the last time you heard of the Khmer Empire, whose sprawling temple complexes still tower over jungles in Cambodia, or the Aksumite Kingdom, an African powerhouse that minted its own gold coins and traded with Rome and India. These weren't backwater territories, they were cultural and political titans, their influence stretching across continents. So why did they fade into obscurity? Sometimes it was conquest, other times it was sheer bad luck, shifting trade routes, natural disasters, or simply being overshadowed by louder voices in history's chorus. But their stories matter because they remind us that greatness isn't always measured by how long it's remembered, but by the mark it leaves behind. This journey isn't just about dusting off old maps or reciting names you've never heard. It's about uncovering the hidden threads that connect us to these lost worlds. How did the Chola dynasty, a maritime empire from southern India, dominate sea trade for centuries? What made the Hittites, masters of iron and chariots, vanish so completely that their language became a puzzle for archaeologists? And why does the medieval Mali Empire, with its legendary wealth, feel like a myth when its gold once dazzled the globe? We'll explore empires selected not just for their size or military might, but for the way they reshaped cultures, inspired art, or even changed the course of technology. By the end, you'll see history not as a straight line, but as a tapestry woven with threads we've barely begun to trace. So let's begin, because some stories are too extraordinary to stay buried. Long before the rise of Rome or Persia, another empire dominated the landscape of the ancient world, one you've likely never heard of despite its groundbreaking achievements. The Hittites didn't just rule Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. They revolutionized warfare, trade, and technology in ways that echoed for centuries. Imagine a civilization so advanced for its time that it could go toe-to-toe with Egypt's pharaohs, not just on the battlefield but in diplomacy. Their secret weapon, iron. While other Bronze Age kingdoms relied on softer metals, the Hittites perfected iron smelting, crafting weapons and tools that were stronger, sharper, and far more durable. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a game-changer, giving them an edge that made their armies nearly unstoppable. But their brilliance didn't end there. The Hittites were master strategists, pioneering military tactics like the three-man chariot, which allowed a driver, warrior, and shield-bearer to attack with terrifying efficiency. Their legal code was remarkably progressive for its time, with laws that emphasized restitution over punishment, even for serious crimes. And then there's Hattusa, their sprawling capital, a city of grand temples and towering walls that seemed unshakable until it wasn't. Around 1200 BCE, the Hittite Empire collapsed almost overnight. Hattusa was abandoned, its people scattered, and its language silenced for centuries. What caused such a powerful civilization to vanish so abruptly? Some point to invasions by the mysterious sea peoples, while others blame famine or internal strife. But the most compelling theory involves a perfect storm of disasters: climate shifts, trade disruptions, and social unrest that unraveled the empire thread by thread. For centuries, the Hittites faded into legend, their existence doubted until archaeologists began piecing together the clues they left behind. Today, their legacy lives on in the technologies they pioneered and the mysteries they left unsolved. They remind us that even the mightiest empires are fragile, and history's greatest lessons often come from those who vanished without a trace. While the Hittites were forging iron in Anatolia, another powerhouse was rising to the east, one built not just on conquest, but on the thundering wheels of chariots and the shrewd alliances of royal marriages. The Mitanni Empire may not ring familiar today, but for 2 centuries this Hurrian-speaking kingdom dominated the heart of Mesopotamia, leaving an indelible mark on the ancient world. Picture this, a realm where elite charioteers trained from childhood became the backbone of an army so formidable that even Egypt's pharaohs sought their expertise. These weren't just soldiers, they were the special forces of the Bronze Age, turning the chariot into a symbol of Mitanni's military prestige. What made the Mitanni truly unique, though, was their mastery of diplomacy. While other empires relied solely on the sword, they wielded marriage contracts like strategic weapons. Their princesses became queens in foreign courts, most famously in Egypt, where a Mitanni bride wed Pharaoh Thutmose IV, sealing an alliance that reshaped the balance of power. This wasn't just political theater. It was a calculated move that bought peace, opened trade routes, and cemented their influence across the region. Yet for all their prowess, the Mitanni faced a challenge even their chariots couldn't outrun: the shifting tides of empire. Pressured by the rising Hittites to the west and the resurgent Assyrians to the east, their territory began to crumble. The final blow came when the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I sacked their capital, Washukani, scattering their elite and absorbing their land. But here's the twist. The Mitanni didn't just vanish. Their legacy lived on in the very empires that conquered them. The Assyrians adopted their chariot tactics, and traces of their culture seeped into the art and administration of their successors. They remind us that some empires don't fall, they transform, leaving fingerprints on history that outlast their own reign. While the Mitanni wielded chariots and royal marriages, another empire was carving its own defiant path in the shadows of Mesopotamia's giants. Meet the Elamites, an ancient civilization rooted in what's now southwestern Iran, whose story reads like a saga of stubborn survival. For over 2,000 years, they thrived in the face of constant pressure from Babylon and Assyria, not through sheer military might alone, but with a blend of cultural ingenuity and strategic cunning. What set the Elamites apart wasn't just their resilience, it was their language. Unlike the dominant Semitic tongues of Mesopotamia, Elamite stood entirely on its own, a linguistic puzzle that still intrigues scholars today. Imagine an entire empire scribbling its laws and legends in a script so unique that modern linguists spent decades deciphering it. Their writing system evolved across 3 distinct phases, a testament to their adaptability, yet another reason they outlasted so many rivals. Then there's their architecture. While Mesopotamia boasted its towering ziggurats, the Elamites built their own monumental step temples, like the grand complex at Chog-ha-Zanbil. This wasn't just imitation, it was innovation. Their ziggurats featured intricate brickwork and glazed decorations, a fusion of Mesopotamian influence and distinctly Elamite artistry. These structures weren't merely religious centers, they were bold declarations of identity, symbols of a people determined to stand apart from their powerful neighbors. But perhaps their greatest legacy was their role as cultural middlemen. Wedged between Mesopotamia and the rising powers of the Iranian plateau, the Elamites became a bridge for ideas, goods, and technologies flowing east and west. They traded lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, mastered metallurgy, and even influenced early Persian administrative systems. When the Assyrians finally sacked their capital, Susa, in 640 BCE, it wasn't the end, it was a transformation. The Persians absorbed Elamite traditions, ensuring their spirit lived on in the Achaemenid Empire's golden age. The Elamites remind us that some empires never truly fall. They simply become part of history's blueprint, quietly shaping the world long after their names fade from memory. Now we journey east, where the collision of cultures gave birth to empires as fascinating as they are forgotten. The Kushan and Indo-Greek kingdoms weren't just political powers, they were vibrant melting pots where Greek philosophy met Buddhist spirituality, where Persian silks changed hands alongside Roman glass, creating a cultural alchemy that still echoes today. First, the Kushans, a dynasty born from the nomadic Yuezhi tribes, who transformed themselves from horse lords of the steppes into the masters of the Silk Road's golden age. Under rulers like Kanishka the Great, their empire stretched from Afghanistan to the Ganges, controlling trade routes that linked Rome to Han China. But their real genius wasn't just wealth, it was synthesis. Kushan coins bore inscriptions in Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit, while their artists pioneered the Gandhara style, where Apollo's serene face merged with the Buddha's tranquil gaze. Imagine Greek sculptors carving Buddhist reliefs with the precision of classical marble, creating art that became the visual language of spiritual exchange across Asia. Then there were the Indo-Greeks, a splash of Hellenistic flair at the edge of the Indian subcontinent. When Alexander's generals retreated, these Greek-speaking rulers didn't just survive, they thrived, blending Athenian aesthetics with local traditions. King Menander, immortalized in Buddhist texts as Milinda, debated philosophy with monks, while their coins featured Zeus on one side and Lakshmi on the other. Their cities boasted Greek-style theaters alongside Hindu temples, and their astronomers even influenced early Indian mathematics. Yet both empires share a haunting irony: their cultural brilliance eclipsed their political legacy. The Kushans faded under Sasanian pressure, while the Indo-Greeks dissolved into the tapestry of Indian kingdoms. But their true conquest wasn't territorial, it was ideological. They proved that empires aren't just built on swords, but on the irresistible power of mixed identities, where borrowed ideas become something entirely new. Today, you can trace their influence in the Buddha statues of Afghanistan or the hybrid deities of Hindu art, whispers of a time when borders blurred and the world grew richer for it. Beneath the radar of mainstream history lies the Satavahana dynasty, a Deccan powerhouse whose influence stretched from India's rugged heartland to the bustling ports of the Arabian Sea. While empires like the Mauryas and Guptas dominate the narrative, the Satavahanas quietly built a legacy of trade, faith, and cultural fusion that rivaled any of their more famous contemporaries. Picture a kingdom where Roman gold coins jingled in marketplaces, where Buddhist stupas rose alongside Hindu temples, and where a single dynasty held its own against invading Saka rulers for centuries. At their peak, the Satavahanas controlled key ports like Sappara and Kalyan, turning India's western coast into a gateway for Mediterranean trade. Roman historians marveled at the flood of Indian spices, gems, and textiles reaching their shores, pepper so precious it was worth its weight in silver. But this wasn't just commerce, it was cultural exchange. Satavahana coins, struck with images of ships and elephants, tell a story of a maritime empire fluent in the language of globalization long before the term existed. Yet trade was only half their brilliance. The Satavahanas were masterful patrons of Buddhism, funding monumental cave complexes like those at Ajanta and Karl. These weren't mere shrines, they were artistic revolutions where sculptors blended indigenous styles with foreign influences, creating serene Buddha figures that would inspire generations. At the same time, they embraced Hinduism, commissioning fire altars for Vedic rituals and temple inscriptions in Prakrit and Sanskrit. This spiritual duality wasn't contradiction, it was strategy, a way to unify diverse subjects under a single crown. But no empire thrives without challenges. The Western Kshatrapas, Saka rulers from the northwest, clashed with the Satavahanas in a tug of war for dominance. Through shrewd alliances and battlefield tenacity, kings like Gautamiputra Satakani turned the tide, reclaiming lost territories and etching their victories into stone edicts. Still, by the mid-5th century CE, the dynasty faded, not with a bang but a whisper. Was it internal strife, shifting trade routes, or simply the slow erosion of time? Whatever the cause, their legacy endured in the caves they carved, the coins they minted, and the blueprint they left for future Deccan kingdoms. The Satavahanas prove that you don't need to conquer the world to change it sometimes. The quietest empires leave the loudest echoes. While empires rose and fell on battlefields and in palaces, one kingdom mastered a different kind of power, control of the sea. Hidden in the emerald jungles of Sumatra, the Srivijaya Empire built its dominance not on vast armies, but on the bustling trade lanes of the Malacca Strait. Think of this narrow waterway as the ancient world's internet, a vital connection between China, India, and the Middle East, where spices, porcelain, and gold changed hands under the watchful eyes of Srivijayan officials. For over 600 years, this Buddhist maritime empire functioned like a medieval toll booth, taxing every ship that dared bypass its ports. The sheer scale of Srivijaya's wealth would have made even the wealthiest medieval kings envious. Chinese records describe towering temples plated in gold, where monks chanted in halls lined with precious gems. Arab traders marveled at the empire's ability to project power without a standing army, relying instead on strategic alliances and a network of coastal cities. But here's the twist: Srivijaya's greatest strength also made it nearly invisible to modern archaeologists. Unlike stone pyramids or marble monuments, their wooden palaces and docks rotted away in Sumatra's humid jungles, leaving behind only whispers, a handful of inscriptions, scattered beads, and the occasional gold relic unearthed by farmers. This absence of physical evidence fueled skepticism for decades, with some scholars dismissing Srivijaya as mere legend until underwater archaeology revealed the truth. Shipwrecks laden with Chinese ceramics and Middle Eastern glass confirmed the empire's role as the undisputed middleman of maritime trade. Even their religious influence lingered. Srivijaya became a pilgrimage hub for Buddhist scholars, attracting monks from as far as Tibet and Korea. Yet no empire rules forever without rivals. Enter the Majapahit of Java, whose territorial ambitions clashed with Srivijaya's commercial dominance. Imagine a high-stakes game of chess played across Indonesian islands, with spices and naval blockades as the pieces. The final blow likely came from shifting trade routes and the rise of new Islamic sultanates, but Srivijaya didn't so much collapse as dissolve. Its ports gradually abandoned to the encroaching forest. Today, their legacy lives on in place names and cultural echoes, a reminder that sometimes the greatest empires leave the lightest footprints. Deep in the jungles of Cambodia, a civilization once thrived with such ambition that its ruins still leave visitors breathless. The Khmer Empire didn't just build temples, they engineered an entire landscape, transforming floodplains into a hydraulic masterpiece that fed 1 million people at its height. At the center of it all stood Angkor Wat, not merely a temple but a cosmic diagram in stone, designed to mirror the Hindu universe. Its towering spires and intricate bas-reliefs tell a story of divine kingship, where rulers like Suryavarman II claimed godly status, their monuments serving as both spiritual portals and political propaganda. But the real marvel wasn't just above ground, it was the vast network of canals, reservoirs, and barrages, massive artificial lakes that turned monsoon chaos into agricultural abundance. Imagine a metropolis where water flowed with precision, filling rice paddies year-round, enabling harvests so plentiful they supported a sprawling urban center long before modern engineering existed. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was theology in motion. The Khmer saw water as sacred, a gift from the gods, and their engineers became its high priests. The West Barre, a reservoir stretching 5 miles long, wasn't just utilitarian, it symbolized the mythical ocean of milk, a Hindu allegory for creation itself. Yet, as empires do, the Khmer evolved. By the 13th century, a quiet revolution unfolded. Buddhism's gentle philosophy began replacing Hinduism's warrior deities. Angkor Wat's Vishnu statues were respectfully reconsecrated as Buddhas, its walls adorned with new narratives of compassion rather than conquest. This shift wasn't violent but organic, reflecting a society redefining its spiritual identity while retaining its architectural genius. Then the mystery: why did Angkor, a city larger than medieval Paris, eventually surrender to the forest? Earlier theories pointed to Siamese invasions, but modern research reveals a subtler culprit: ecological overreach. The same water systems that sustained the Khmer may have doomed them. Sediment cores show collapsing canals choked by deforestation and eroded soils, a warning etched in mud and pollen. Climate shifts, including prolonged droughts, strain the delicate balance of their engineered paradise. The Khmer didn't so much vanish as retreat, their grandsons adapting to new realities along the Mekong's banks. Today, their legacy whispers through the roots of strangler figs gripping temple stones, a reminder that even the mightiest empires must dance with nature's rhythms. The Indian Ocean once trembled beneath the sails of the Chola dynasty, a Tamil powerhouse whose ambitions stretched far beyond the subcontinent. While most empires expanded overland, the Cholas looked seaward, launching naval campaigns so audacious they reshaped Southeast Asia's political map. Picture this: in 1025 CE, King Rajendra Chola dispatched 1,000 ships to Sumatra, sacking the Srivijayan capital and planting the tiger flag of the Cholas on foreign shores. This wasn't just a raid, it was a statement. For the first time, an Indian empire projected power across the ocean, controlling trade routes from the Maldives to the Malacca Strait. Their secret: a navy so sophisticated it functioned like a medieval corporate fleet, with standardized ship designs and deep water ports like Nagapattinam serving as hubs for spices, silks, and slaves. Yet the Cholas weren't just conquerors, they were cultural architects. Their temples, like the Brihadiswara at Thanjavur, soared higher than Europe's Gothic cathedrals, their shadowless corridors a marvel of ancient engineering. Every sculpture, every fresco was a political manifesto in stone, proclaiming the dynasty's divine right to rule. Even their bureaucracy was revolutionary, with land surveys etched on copper plates and village assemblies operating like autonomous democracies under the imperial umbrella. Just south of Chola territory, the Pandyans carved a different kind of legacy, one built on pearls and poetry. While the Cholas dominated the waves, the Pandyans turned the Gulf of Mannar into a liquid treasure chest, diving for pearls so lustrous they adorned Roman emperors and Chinese empresses. Their capital, Madurai, became a beacon of Tamil culture, hosting literary academies where poets competed to compose verses in Sangam tradition. Imagine a court where royalty judged competitions not by swordplay, but by the elegance of a metaphor or the rhythm of a couplet. The Pandyan kings patronized scholars who produced texts like the Thirukkural, a masterpiece of ethical philosophy still quoted today. But history has a way of humbling even the brightest stars. By the 14th century, both dynasties faced the same existential threat: the Delhi Sultanate's cavalry thundering south. The Cholas, already weakened by infighting, collapsed under the strain. The Pandyans, though resilient, saw their pearl beds plundered and their libraries burned by Malik Kafur's raids. Yet their influence didn't vanish, it seeped into the cultural DNA of successor states like Vijayanagara. The Cholas' naval blueprints inspired later seafaring kingdoms, while Pandyan poetry kept the flame of Tamil identity alive. Together, they prove that empires can fall without fading, their echoes lingering in the waves they once ruled and the words they left behind. From the steppes of Central Asia to the sun-baked plains of India, the Ghaznavid Empire carved a legacy as paradoxical as it was profound. Founded by a former slave-turned-warlord, this Turkic-Persian dynasty became both a scourge of Hindu temples and an unlikely torchbearer for Persian poetry. Picture Mahmud of Ghazni, their most infamous ruler, leading 17 brutal raids into the Indian subcontinent, not just for conquest but for the glittering treasures of its temples. His most notorious plunder, the Golden Gates of Somnath, ripped from their hinges in 1026 and hauled 800 miles back to Afghanistan. To Hindu chroniclers, this was sacrilege, to Muhammad, proof of divine favor. Yet these raids weren't mere vandalism, they were calculated theater. Each seized idol and desecrated shrine broadcast a message. The Ghaznavids were unstoppable, their armies blessed by Allah. But there's a twist. While Muhammad's sword shattered temple walls, his court nurtured minds. Ghazni became a beacon of Persian culture, attracting intellectuals like the poet Ferdowsi, whose epic Shahnameh, written under Ghaznavid patronage, would define Persian identity for centuries. Imagine a city where Turkish generals debated philosophy in Persian, where minarets cast shadows over libraries stocked with translated Greek texts. This cultural alchemy gave birth to a hybrid identity, Turkic in blood, Persian in tongue, Islamic in faith. The Ghaznavids didn't just raid India, they remade it into a stage for their cosmopolitan vision, blending Central Asian vigor with Persian sophistication. So why does history remember the Mughals but forget their Ghaznavid predecessors? Partly scale, the Mughals built an empire that dwarfed Ghaznavid territories. But also narrative, where Babur and Akbar left marble mausoleums and unified kingdoms, Muhammad's legacy is written in temple rubble. Yet the Ghaznavids' true impact was subtler. They laid the groundwork for every Turkic dynasty that followed, proving that conquest and culture could dance together. Their Persianate court model became the blueprint for Delhi's sultans and eventually the Mughals themselves. Even their brutality served a purpose. By exposing India's wealth to the Islamic world, they ignited a craving that would draw conquerors for centuries. The Ghaznavids remind us that empires aren't judged by their longevity, but by the chains of consequence they set in motion. In the windswept deserts of Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire rose as a beacon of learning and power until it faced the one force even its mighty walls couldn't withstand. At its zenith, this Persianate kingdom stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Hindu Kush, a crossroads of trade and intellect where caravans carried not just silk and spices but groundbreaking ideas. The namesake of algebra itself, mathematician Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, walked its sun-baked streets, his revolutionary calculations laying the foundation for modern mathematics. Observatories dotted the empire, charting stars with precision that would inspire astronomers for centuries. But Khwarezm's golden age came with a fatal flaw: arrogance. When Genghis Khan sent a peace caravan of Mongol traders in 1218, Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad Roman II made a decision that would echo through history. He executed the envoys, their severed heads sent back as a taunt. The Khan's response was swift and apocalyptic. Mongol horsemen descended like a sandstorm, reducing mighty cities to smoldering ruins. At Urgench, the empire's glittering capital, resistance lasted for months. When the walls finally fell, the Mongols unleashed a nightmare, diverting the Amudarya River to flood the city, drowning survivors who'd hidden in cellars. Chroniclers wrote of streets choked with corpses, the air thick with the stench of decay. Yet amid the carnage, a haunting mystery unfolded. The Shah himself fled across his crumbling empire, pursued by Mongol generals. His final moments remain a riddle. Some say he died of pleurisy on a remote Caspian island. Others claim he was stabbed by a fisherman, his body left unburied as the tide swallowed him. What makes Khwarezm's story so poignant isn't just its devastation, it's the brilliance it extinguished. Before the Mongols, its libraries held Greek philosophy translated into Arabic, its hospitals pioneered early surgical techniques, and its engineers designed qanats, subterranean aqueducts that turned deserts green. Even in defeat, its legacy seeped outward. Al-Khwarizmi's works reached Europe, where his name morphed into algorithm, the foundation of our digital age. The Khwarezmian Empire reminds us that history's greatest tragedies aren't just about fallen kingdoms, but about the light they might have kindled had they survived. While the empires of the East dazzled with their temples and trade routes, the Western Mediterranean witnessed a different kind of power play, one where Berber dynasties turned North Africa into a hub of scholarship and seafaring might. Enter the Marinids and Hafsids, two empires that proved the Maghreb was anything but a backwater. The Marinids, ruling from Fez, transformed their capital into an intellectual sanctuary where the pursuit of knowledge rivaled the greatest centers of medieval Europe. Their madrasas weren't just schools, they were architectural marvels adorned with intricate tilework and carved cedar, where scholars debated astronomy, medicine, and Islamic law under vaulted ceilings. At the heart of it all stood the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in 859 by a wealthy merchant's daughter Fatima al-Fihri, and later expanded by the Marinids into the world's oldest continuously operating university. Imagine a place where Jewish philosophers, Christian diplomats, and Muslim theologians exchanged ideas centuries before the Renaissance, their debates echoing through the same halls that still stand today. Yet the Marinids weren't content with just nurturing minds. Their military campaigns stretched into Iberia, where they propped up the crumbling emirate of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. Their cavalry, a mix of Berber tribesmen and Andalusian exiles, became a thorn in the side of Castilian kings, proving that North African influence could shape European politics. But overreach and infighting eventually dimmed their power, leaving Fez as their enduring monument, a city where the scent of tanned leather and the murmur of Quranic recitation still carry whispers of their golden age. Meanwhile, along the coast, the Hafsids were writing a different chapter, one inked in saltwater and defiance. Based in Tunis, they turned the Mediterranean into their playground, building a navy that wasn't just a fleet but a floating empire. European merchants dreaded Hafsid corsairs, whose sleek galleys could outmaneuver Venetian traders and Spanish warships alike. But these weren't mere pirates, they were state-sanctioned entrepreneurs, their raids bankrolling Tunis's bustling souks and ornate palaces. The Hafsids mastered the art of playing rivals against each other, signing treaties with Aragon one day and unleashing their captains on Sicilian coasts the next. Their greatest leverage, control of the Sicilian Strait, a choke point where they taxed or plundered ships laden with African gold and Asian spices. What made these dynasties remarkable wasn't just their individual feats, but their shared legacy of resilience. While Europe's kingdoms obsessed with crusades and dynastic squabbles, the Marinids and Hafsids carved out spheres of influence where culture and commerce thrived on their own terms. Their decline came not from internal decay but from external shifts, the Marinids buckling under Portuguese coastal raids, the Hafsids succumbing to Ottoman might. Yet even in eclipse they left fingerprints on history, in the libraries of Fez, the maritime laws of the Mediterranean, and the unyielding spirit of North Africa's Berber heartland. They remind us that empires need not conquer continents to leave their mark sometimes. A city of scholars or a fleet of daring captains can echo just as loud. High above the dusty plains of northern Ethiopia, the stone obelisks of Aksum still pierce the sky-silent sentinels of an empire that once commanded the Red Sea's golden trade. These towering stelae, some reaching 90 feet tall, weren't just monuments, they were declarations. Carved with false doors and intricate latticework, they mimicked the multi-story palaces of Aksum's elites, a permanent assertion of power in a land where kings claimed descent from the biblical queen of Sheba herself. The kingdom's roots intertwined with legend. Some even whispered that the Ark of the Covenant, stolen from Jerusalem by Sheba's son Menelik, still rested in Aksum's Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, guarded by monks sworn to secrecy. But Aksum's true brilliance lay in its mastery of geography. Perched between the Nile and the Red Sea, it became the indispensable middleman in a trade network spanning 3 continents. Ivory from Africa's interior, gold from Sennar, and even exotic animals like giraffes and rhinoceroses passed through Aksumite ports, bound for Rome, Persia, and India. Their coinage, struck in gold, silver, and bronze, bore inscriptions in Greek and Jais, a linguistic nod to their cosmopolitan reach. One 4th century coin even depicted King Azana flanked by wheat stalks, a subtle boast of the kingdom's agricultural wealth. Then came a transformation as dramatic as their obelisks were tall. Around 330 CE, Azana abandoned the crescent and disc symbols of his ancestors, embracing Christianity after a Syrian missionary named Frumentius converted the court. Overnight, Aksum became one of the first Christian kingdoms in history, predating Europe's conversion by centuries. Churches rose where pagan altars once stood, and jazz scriptures replaced hymns to local deities. This wasn't just religious change, it was a strategic realignment, tying Aksum to the rising power of Byzantium and distancing it from declining Rome. Yet for all its adaptability, Aksum couldn't outrun the forces reshaping its world. By the 7th century, Persian conquests disrupted Red Sea trade, while the rise of Islam sidelined Christian kingdoms. But the cruelest blow may have come from the land itself. Soil samples reveal a devastating pattern. Centuries of intensive farming and deforestation stripped the highlands of fertile soil, while shifting monsoon rains turned reliable harvests into gambles. The kingdom that once fed thousands slowly starved, its people retreating to the mountains as the empire's grand cities faded into myth. Today, Aksum's legacy endures in Ethiopia's Orthodox faith, its towering stelae now UNESCO treasures, and the tantalizing question, was this really Sheba's realm? Archaeologists still scour the region for clues, but perhaps the answer doesn't matter. Aksum's true power wasn't in mythical bloodlines, but in its very real ability to bridge worlds African, Asian, and European, leaving a mark as enduring as the stones its people carved. The Sahara seems an unlikely place for an empire to flourish, a sea of dunes where temperatures scorch and water vanishes like a mirage. Yet beneath this unforgiving landscape, the Garamantes carved out a civilization so ingenious it defied the desert itself. Their secret, a labyrinth of underground tunnels called fagaras, stretching thousands of miles like veins beneath the sand. These weren't just ditches, they were feats of hydraulic engineering, tapping into ancient aquifers to channel water to the surface with gravity's precision. Picture a desert transformed, orchards heavy with dates, fields of wheat and grapes, even public baths where camel caravans paused to wash off the dust of trans-Saharan trade. The Garamantes didn't just survive in this wasteland, they turned it into an oasis, their cities bustling with blacksmiths forging iron tools and potters crafting vessels adorned with intricate geometric patterns. But water wasn't their only commodity. The Garamantes became infamous for another, darker trade, slaves. Roman chroniclers shuddered at their raids, describing swift camel-borne warriors striking coastal settlements, hauling captives back to the desert to toil in their fields or be sold to Mediterranean markets. These weren't random attacks, they were calculated ventures, with Garamantes scouts exploiting Rome's military distractions to seize human cargo. Ironically, the same empire that relied on slave labor also held a surprising cosmopolitan edge. Garamante nobles wore Roman glass jewelry, drank from imported amphorae, and even adopted Libyan Berber scripts, blending desert traditions with foreign influences. Yet their brilliance couldn't outlast the very resource that built them. As centuries passed, the aquifers drained faster than the fagaras could replenish them. Each generation dug deeper, chasing dwindling water tables until the tunnels ran dry. By the 5th century CE, the fields turned to dust, the cities emptied, and the desert reclaimed its dominion. Modern satellite imagery reveals the haunting footprint of their collapse, ghostly outlines of abandoned settlements, now buried under shifting sands. The Garamantes left no grand monuments, no epic poems, just a whisper in the wind and a lesson etched into the earth. Even the mightiest empires are bound to the land that feeds them, and when the water vanishes, so too does the civilization it sustained. While the Garamantes tapped hidden waters beneath the Sahara, another empire turned the desert's vast emptiness into a highway for human tragedy and profit. The Kanem-Bornu Empire wasn't just a kingdom, it was a machine fueled by the trans-Saharan slave trade, its rulers growing fat on a commerce that stretched from the marshes of Lake Chad to the markets of Cairo and Damascus. Picture camel caravans not laden with gold or spices, but with shackled men, women, and children marching across dunes under the whip's crack. Kanem Bornu's location was its grim fortune, straddling the Sahel where sedentary farmers and nomadic herders clashed, providing a steady stream of captives for the taking. Their my kings didn't just tolerate this trade, they institutionalized it, appointing state officials to oversee slave raids deep into neighboring territories. A single expedition could net thousands, their fate sealed in Tripoli or Baghdad, where eunuchs fetched prices high enough to finance entire wars. Yet Kanem Bornu's story isn't one of unrelenting darkness. In the royal courts of Njimi and later Bornu, scholars copied Qurans in exquisite calligraphy, and poets composed verses in Arabic and Kanuri. The empire's conversion to Islam in the 11th century wasn't merely spiritual, it was a shrewd political move, aligning them with the vast network of Muslim traders who crisscrossed the desert. Their most famous ruler, Idris Aluma, even made the pilgrimage to Mecca with an entourage so lavish it dazzled the Arabian elite. He returned with Turkish musketeers and Ottoman advisors, turning his army into the most feared force in the Sahel. But firepower couldn't mask the empire's existential paradox, a society that produced beautiful manuscripts and brutal raids in equal measure, its wealth as inseparable from suffering as the desert is from sand. 1,000 miles to the west, a different kind of empire rose under the same sun. The Songhai, centered on the Niger River's bend, built their dominance not on chains but on ideas. Timbuktu became their crown jewel, a city so rich in knowledge that its libraries held more volumes than some European capitals. Scholars at the Sankore University debated astronomy, medicine, and law under roofs lined with manuscripts penned in gold ink. One resident, Ahmad Baba, reportedly owned a personal library of 1,600 books, lamenting after a Moroccan invasion that he'd lost more than you could carry on a camel. The Songhai didn't just collect knowledge, they produced it. Mathematicians calculated celestial movements with astonishing accuracy, while geographers sketched maps rivaling those of contemporary Europe. This golden age met its end not with a whimper but with gunpowder's thunder. In 1591, Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur, hungry for Songhai's gold, sent an army of renegade Spanish musketeers and camel-mounted cannons across the Sahara. At the Battle of Tondabai, volleys of lead shot tore through Songhai's cavalry charges, their swords no match for European firearms. The Moroccans sacked Timbuktu, shipping scholars like Ahmad Baba to Marrakesh in chains and smashing the university's doors. Yet even in defeat, Songhai's legacy proved hard to extinguish. Dispersed scholars carried their knowledge to new centers, preserving texts in hidden desert towns. Today, families in Timbuktu still guard ancient manuscripts in locked trunks, waiting for the day their city reclaims its place as Africa's library. The contrast between these empires couldn't be starker, one built on the backs of the enslaved, the other on the shoulders of thinkers. But both shared a common lesson: no empire, no matter how brilliant or brutal, is immune to time's erosion. Kanem Bornu's slave routes vanished beneath shifting dunes, while Songhai's libraries fell silent under foreign boots. Yet their echoes remain in the DNA of descendants scattered across continents, and in the fragile pages of manuscripts still whispering secrets across the centuries. The towering stone warriors of Chola stand frozen in time, their impassive faces guarding secrets of an empire that blurred the line between history and legend. The Toltecs didn't just rule Mesoamerica, they invented its mythology, crafting a narrative so powerful that even their eventual collapse couldn't erase it. At the heart of their story is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who transcends archaeology to become something more, a symbol of lost golden ages and promised returns. The real Quetzalcoatl was likely a Toltec ruler, Topiltzin-Ciacatl, a priest-king who banned human sacrifice and championed arts and learning before being driven into exile by warlords. His departure became legend, a god sailing east on a raft of serpents, vowing to return, Centuries later, this myth would haunt the Aztecs, who mistook Cortez's sails for divine fulfillment with catastrophic consequences. But separating Toltec fact from fiction is like tracing shadows on a temple wall. Their capital, Tolan, modern-day Chola, was said to glow with jade and gold, its palaces adorned with feathers and precious stones. Archaeologists find a different reality, a city of modest grandeur, its most iconic relics being the Atlantean columns. These 15-foot basalt warriors, clad in butterfly-shaped breastplates and holding atlatls, weren't just art, they were propaganda. Each statue's back bears grooves for actual banners, turning them into living standards for military processions. The message was clear: Tolan's power rested on the blades of its warrior elite. Yet no empire can thrive on mythology alone. The Toltecs' true genius lay in their cultural exports, architectural styles, religious rituals, and artistic motifs that spread across Mesoamerica like wildfire. Their signature serpent columns and chacmuls, reclining figures holding offering bowls, became templates for Maya and Aztec builders. Even their ballgame courts were copied, complete with rings carved like intertwined serpents. This soft power made them immortal. Long after Chola fell, rulers from Chichen Itza to Tenochtitlan claimed Toltec ancestry to legitimize their rule. Drought may have been the dagger to Tolan's heart. Tree rings tell a story of devastating megadroughts in the 12th century, turning farmlands to dust and sparking civil unrest. The final blows came from nomadic Chichimec tribes who overran the weakened city. But the Toltecs didn't so much vanish as dissolve into the cultural bloodstream of their successors. When the Aztecs unearthed Toltec artifacts centuries later, they revered them as relics of a godlike race, weaving Toltec achievements into their own origin myths. The irony is profound. An empire that may have been less glorious than legend remembers became the yardstick against which all later Mesoamerican civilizations measured themselves. Their legacy proves that sometimes what an empire leaves behind in stories matters more than what it built in stone. High in the thin air of the Andes, where even today visitors gasp for oxygen, the Tiwanaku civilization built a capital that defied logic. Their city stood 12,000 feet above sea level, higher than any modern metropolis, yet thrived for centuries. Its temples aligned with celestial movements and its fields producing bumper crops in seemingly barren soil. At the heart of it all looms the Gate of the Sun, a 10-ton monolith carved from a single block of andesite, its surface etched with enigmatic figures believed to be a celestial calendar or perhaps a map of the cosmos. The central figure, often called the staff god, clutches twin staffs while radiating jagged lines, an image so potent it would reappear centuries later in Incan art. But the gate's true purpose remains one of archaeology's great riddles. Some scholars argue its carvings track the solstices, while others whisper it marked a portal to the spirit world, a threshold where priests communed with deities. What's even more astonishing than Tiwanaku's monuments is how they fed their people. In this harsh environment where frost bites 9 months a year, they engineered a system of raised field agriculture called suka colas, grids of elevated planting beds separated by canals. These weren't just garden plots, they were climate-smart technology. The water in the canals absorbed sunlight by day, radiating warmth by night to shield crops from freezing. Nutrient-rich muck dredged from nearby Lake Titicaca fertilized the soil, yielding harvests so abundant they could support a population of up to 70,000. Modern experiments prove their brilliance. When researchers recreated suka colas in the 1980s, potato yields tripled compared to conventional fields. Yet by the 11th century, Tiwanaku's grand temples stood empty, their priests vanished, their fields abandoned. Was it climate catastrophe? Ice cores from Andean glaciers reveal a prolonged drought around this time, shrinking the life-giving waters of Lake Titicaca. Or did invasion play a role? Carved stones show signs of deliberate defacement, and oral histories tell of warriors from lower valleys sacking the city. The likeliest answer lies in a tragic synergy, drought weakening the empire just as hungry neighbors smelled vulnerability. What lingers is Tiwanaku's quiet revenge. Though their empire faded, their innovations seeped into the DNA of Andean culture. The Incas, who rose centuries later, adopted their raised field techniques and venerated Tiwanaku as a sacred origin site. Even today, Bolivian farmers reviving Suca Colas find their ancestors' wisdom outproduces modern tractors. The Gate of the Sun still stands, its carvings whispering secrets we've yet to fully understand, proof that some civilizations don't truly die. They simply wait for us to rediscover them. Long before the Inca etched their empire across the Andes, two civilizations laid the groundwork, one with stone highways that tied mountains together, the other with a city of dried mud that shimmered like gold under the desert sun. The Weri and the Chimu may not be household names today, but their innovations shaped South America in ways still visible if you know where to look. Picture the Weri first, an empire so obsessed with connectivity that they built over 10,000 miles of roads, some paved with stone, others carved straight into cliff faces. These weren't mere trails, they were the backbone of an administrative machine, with way stations stocked with state-supplied provisions for runners who relayed messages at breakneck speed. A message could travel 250 miles in a single day faster than the Pony Express millennia later. Yet their true genius lay in how they ruled without brute force. Unlike empires that demanded cultural assimilation, the Weri allowed conquered peoples to keep their languages and gods so long as they adopted Weri infrastructure and traded within their network. Their capital, Huari, became a melting pot of Andean cultures, its workshops churning out pottery and textiles that blended regional styles with Weri flair. Archaeologists still debate whether this was an empire of tolerance or simply shrewd economics, but the result was undeniable, a highland realm so stable it flourished for nearly 500 years. Now shift to the coast where the Chimu built a different kind of marvel. Chan Chan, their sprawling capital, was the largest adobe city ever constructed, a maze of towering walls adorned with intricate carvings of fish, seabirds, and mythical creatures. In a land where rain was rarer than gold, the Chimu turned the desert green with a hydraulic system so advanced it put contemporary Europe to shame. Their engineers tapped underground rivers with filtration galleries, channeling water through thousands of miles of canals to feed orchards of avocado and corn. The wealth this generated was staggering. Royal tombs overflowed with spondylus shells, a sacred coral so prized it was traded as far north as Mexico. But both empires shared the same fatal flaw: location. The Weri's highways and the Chimu's aqueducts made them irresistible targets when the Inca began their meteoric rise. Pachacuti, the Inca's visionary ruler, absorbed the Weri's road network wholesale, repurposing it for his own imperial couriers. The Chimu resisted longer, their walls holding back Inca armies for years until the invaders did the unthinkable. By diverting the Moch River upstream, they cut off Chan Chan's water supply, forcing surrender without a final battle. The irony is palpable. The very engineering that sustained the Chimu became their undoing. What lingers today isn't just ruins but lessons. The Weri proved that empires can thrive without cultural erasure, while the Chimu showcased how deserts could bloom with ingenuity. Their stories remind us that conquest isn't always annihilation. Sometimes it's just the next chapter in an endless cycle of reinvention. The Inca may have written the final page, but these civilizations penned the prologue. While the Aztecs cast their golden shadow across Mesoamerica, another empire stood defiant in the western highlands, one armed not with obsidian, but with forged copper blades that gleamed like fire in the sun. The Tarascan state, known to its Purepecha-speaking founders as the Ayachecuatezinsensoni, was no minor kingdom. This was a civilization so formidable it turned back Aztec invasions not once but multiple times, its warriors wielding metal weapons in a land where most armies still relied on brittle volcanic glass. Imagine the shock of Aztec soldiers accustomed to superiority, facing an enemy who could parry their macuahuitl swords with durable copper axes, a technological edge that leveled the battlefield. What made the Tarascans truly remarkable wasn't just their metallurgy, but their cultural independence. Unlike nearly every other major Mesoamerican power, they resisted Nahua influence entirely. Their language, Purépecha, stood linguistically isolated, unrelated to the Aztecs' Nahuatl or the Maya tongues. Their gods had no direct counterparts in neighboring pantheons. Curacauri, their fire deity, demanded blood like Huitzilopochtli but ruled over a cosmology entirely their own. Even their capital, Tizintzatzin, broke the mold. Built along the shores of Lake Pátzcuaro, its Yucatan-stepped pyramids with unusual circular bases stood as architectural declarations of difference. Yet for all their strength, the Tarascans faced an enemy no copper blade could pierce: European germs and deception. When Spanish forces under Cristobal de Olid arrived in 1522, they didn't assault Tizintzatzin directly. Instead, they exploited old rivalries, allying with the Tlaxcalans, bitter enemies of both the Aztecs and Tarascans. The last Tarascan ruler, Tangaxuan II, initially welcomed the Spaniards, perhaps seeing them as counterweights to Aztec power. It was a fatal miscalculation. Within months, trumped-up charges of treason led to his torture and execution, his empire dismantled into encomiendas. The tragedy of the Tarascans lies not in their fall, but in what might have been. Their metallurgical techniques, more advanced than any in the Americas, hinted at a path untaken, one where indigenous metalworking might have evolved into industrial-scale production. Their resistance to Aztec cultural dominance proved alternative visions of Mesoamerican civilization could thrive. Today, their descendants keep Purépecha alive, a linguistic island in a Spanish-speaking sea, while archaeologists still puzzle over the molten ingenuity of a people who forged their own destiny. South of Egypt, where the Nile carves through golden sands, the kingdom of Kush rose not in Egypt's shadow, but as its rival and sometimes its ruler. While history often sidelines Kush as a footnote to the pharaohs, this was an empire that turned the tables completely, conquering its northern neighbor and installing a line of Nubian pharaohs who would reign as Egypt's 25th dynasty. These weren't mere imitators, they were innovators, blending Egyptian traditions with distinctly Kushite flair. Take the pyramids of Nuri and Marai, steeper, narrower, and more numerous than Egypt's, clustered like silent sentinels over the desert. Where Egyptian pyramids were smooth-sided marvels of limestone, Kush's were rugged statements of local sandstone. Their compact designs a testament to a culture that prized efficiency as much as grandeur. The pinnacle of Kush's power came under Pharaoh Pi, a ruler whose military genius was matched only by his cultural ambition. In 728 BCE, he marched north, not to plunder Egypt, but to reclaim it, framing his campaign as a holy mission to restore Mat, the cosmic order Egyptians believed their wayward rulers had abandoned. After crushing a coalition of Egyptian princes, Pi did something astonishing. He had his victory stela inscribed not just in hieroglyphs, but in exquisite detail, depicting the exact moment enemy rulers knelt to kiss his feet. Yet for all his might, Pi chose to return to Napata, his southern capital, leaving Egypt to his governors. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Kushite rulers understood that their heartland's wealth lay not in the Nile Delta's politics, but in the gold mines of the Wadi Alaki, a treasure vault that bankrolled their empire. But when Assyrian armies pushed Kush out of Egypt in the 7th century BCE, the empire didn't crumble, it reinvented itself. The Kushites shifted their capital south to Meroe, a city that would become the furnace of Africa. Here, amid groves of acacia trees, Kush's engineers mastered something Egypt never fully embraced: iron smelting on an industrial scale. Meroe's landscapes still bristle with ancient slag heaps, the remnants of furnaces that produced weapons, tools, and trade goods coveted across the continent. The city's position was no accident. It sat atop iron-rich hills and forests to fuel the fires, turning Kush into the continent's first great iron power. Yet Meroe's true brilliance lay in its cultural synthesis. While Egyptian hieroglyphs adorned earlier monuments, Meroe developed its own script, still only partially deciphered, carved into stelae that mix pharaonic motifs with distinctly African imagery, elephants, giraffes, and lion gods. Their pantheon merged Ammon with local deities like Apedemak, a lion-headed warrior worshipped in temples where reliefs show kings striding forward, arrows in hand, a fusion of Egyptian regality and Nubian martial pride. Even their royal succession puzzled outsiders. Kush often crowned queens as full sovereigns like Ammonianas, who famously led armies against Rome's legions and negotiated a treaty that spared her kingdom from conquest. The end of Kush came not with a clash of swords, but with the quiet unraveling of trade. As Rome's dominance shifted commerce to the Red Sea, Meroe's iron monopoly waned. The rains grew erratic, the pastures thin, until even the mighty furnaces cooled. By the 4th century CE, Aksum's rising star eclipsed Kush for good. But their legacy lingers in the stubborn independence of Nubian cultures, in the ironworking traditions that spread across Africa, and in the truth that history's so-called peripheries often shape the center more than we admit. Kush reminds us that empires aren't defined by the spotlight they occupy, but by the light they cast long after they're gone. The Parthian Empire emerged from the ashes of fallen Persian dynasties, and for centuries they perfected a style of warfare that left even Rome's legions helpless in the dust. Picture a battlefield where disciplined infantry formations meant nothing because the enemy refused to stand and fight. Instead, Parthian horse archers would swarm like wasps, unleashing volleys of arrows before vanishing beyond the horizon. Their signature tactic, the Parthian shot, became legendary, riders feigning retreat only to twist in the saddle and loose arrows with deadly accuracy. Nowhere was this more devastating than at Carrhae in 53 BCE, where a Roman army led by the overconfident Crassus met catastrophe. 7 legions marched into the Mesopotamian desert, only to be picked apart by waves of mounted archers. When the sun set, 20,000 Romans lay dead, their standards captured, and Crassus himself met a gruesome end. Molten gold poured down his throat as a mocking tribute to his insatiable greed. But the Parthians were more than just masters of mobile warfare. Their political system was a fascinating patchwork of decentralized power. Unlike the rigid bureaucracy of Rome or the centralized Persian empires before them, the Parthians ruled through a semi-feudal structure. Local noble families, known as the 7 Great Houses, held immense autonomy, governing vast territories in exchange for military service. The king sat atop this pyramid, but his authority depended on keeping these powerful clans loyal through marriage alliances and shared spoils of war. This system gave the empire flexibility, allowing it to absorb shocks that would have shattered more rigid states, yet it also sowed the seeds of instability. Succession crises and noble rebellions became recurring dramas, weakening the realm from within. Despite their brilliance, the Parthians suffer from historical neglect, often overshadowed by the more glamorous Sasanians who replaced them. Part of this stems from their own elusive nature. They left few grand monuments or written records, preferring oral traditions and impermanent materials. The Sasanians, by contrast, cast themselves as the torchbearers of Persian glory, erecting towering reliefs and producing lavish chronicles that captured historians' imaginations. Yet without the Parthians, there would have been no Sasanian rise. It was the Parthians who preserved Persian culture during centuries of Hellenistic rule, blending it with steppe traditions to create something entirely new. Their legacy lingers in the tactics of later cavalry empires, the ballads of Central Asian bards, and the quiet truth that sometimes history forgets the architects of its most pivotal moments. While the Song dynasty dazzled with its poets and philosophers, Two steppe empires rose in the north, masters of cultural fusion and forgotten resilience. The Liao dynasty didn't just conquer parts of China, they reimagined governance itself, crafting a dual system where Khitan horsemen and Chinese bureaucrats ruled side by side. Imagine an empire split like a carefully balanced scale. Khitan tribesmen answered to the northern chancellery, upholding nomadic traditions with seasonal hunts and felt tents, while the southern chancellery mirrored Tang-style administration, collecting taxes in coin and rice. This wasn't assimilation, it was pragmatism on a grand scale. Their capitals embodied the divide. Shangjing, the northern capital, housed the emperor's sprawling tent within city walls, where tribal elders drank mare's milk and debated under the open sky. Nanjing, modern-day Beijing, thrived with Chinese-style palaces and civil service exams, its streets bustling with merchants selling silk to Uyghur traders. Even timekeeping became an act of duality. Liao emperors used two calendars, one for their nomadic rituals, another for agricultural cycles. Yet the Liao's greatest legacy might be what they left behind, the mysterious Khitan script. Developed to assert cultural independence from Chinese characters, its angular glyphs were carved onto stone steels and diplomatic seals. Less than 2% of these inscriptions have been deciphered, leaving historians to wonder what secrets they hold. When the dynasty fell to the Jurchen Jin in 1125, the Khitan people didn't vanish, they scattered westward, possibly inspiring a name that would echo through history: Cathay, the medieval European term for China derived from Khitai. Meanwhile, nestled along the Silk Road's eastern fringe, the Western Xia dynasty carved its own defiant identity. Founded by the Tangut people, this empire refused to be a mere vassal to Song China or Liao. Their crowning achievement, a writing system so complex it became a linguistic fortress. The Tangut script, with its nearly 6,000 characters, wasn't just a tool, it was a declaration. Every hooked stroke and looping line proclaimed, "We are not Chinese, not Tibetan, not Mongol. We are Tangut." Monks translated Buddhist sutras into this ornate script, while officials used it to record laws in a kingdom where multi-ethnic subjects Tanguts, Han, Tibetans lived under a shared legal code. But the Western Xia's obsession with cultural independence became their undoing. When Genghis Khan demanded troops for his conquests, the Tangut ruler refused twice. The Khan's revenge was apocalyptic. Mongol armies besieged Xia cities for over 20 years, systematically erasing their existence. By 1227, the Tangut script was banned, their libraries burned, and their very name struck from records. Today, only a handful of temples in China's Ningxia region preserve fragments of their texts, and linguists still grapple with decoding this lost language. The irony is haunting. An empire that crafted one of history's most intricate scripts was silenced so thoroughly that even their words nearly died with them. Together, the Liao and Western Xia embody a paradox of steppe empires. Their greatest strength sowed the seeds of their oblivion. The Liao's dual administration proved too delicate to survive Jurchen ambition, while the Tangut's fierce cultural pride made them a target for Mongol annihilation. Yet in their fleeting dominance they reshaped China's north, proving that empires need not last centuries to alter history's course. Their ghosts linger in undeciphered scripts and hyphenated identities, whispering that power isn't always measured in years, but in the echoes left when the world tries to forget you. Beneath the volcanic peaks of Java, a kingdom rose with ambitions as vast as the archipelago itself. The Majapahit Empire, immortalized in the 14th century Nagarakretagama poem, wasn't just another regional power, it was a thalassocracy, a maritime realm where ships mattered more than fortresses and trade routes were the true borders. The Nagarakretagama paints a dazzling portrait of its zenith under Hayam Wuruk, where envoys from Siam to Champa kowtowed before the Javanese court, and territories from Sumatra to New Guinea allegedly paid tribute. But here's the rub. Was Majapahit truly an imperial hegemon or a glorified federation of ports bound by shared commerce and diplomacy? The answer lies in the spaces between the poem's boastful lines. Archaeology reveals a nuanced reality. Unlike the rigid bureaucracy of China or the monumental sprawl of Angkor, Majapahit's power flowed through a web of alliances. Local rulers kept their titles and customs, swearing loyalty in exchange for access to the empire's sprawling trade network. Think of it less as a centralized state and more as a medieval corporate franchise. Majapahit provided the brand prestige, the infrastructure, ports and navy, and the buyers Chinese and Indian merchants, while regional chiefs handled the day-to-day governance. The empire's true capital wasn't just the brick palaces of Troulan, but the decks of its merchant fleets, which ferried Javanese spices, Balinese slaves, and Moluccan nutmeg across the monsoon winds. Yet to dismiss Majapahit as merely a loose confederation misses its genius. The Nagarakretagama's notorious mandala concept, concentric circles of influence radiating from Java, wasn't just poetic fancy. It reflected a sophisticated understanding of soft power. Distant lands like Pahang or Borneo might never see a Javanese tax collector, but their rulers coveted Majapahit's porcelain-laden ships and the prestige of royal marriages. When the poem claims the islands bowed like rice stalks in the wind, it's metaphor, not military reportage. Even the legendary Prime Minister Gajah Mada's oath to conquer Nusantara, the archipelago, likely symbolized commercial dominance, not literal occupation. The empire's decline holds another clue. When Majapahit fractured in the 15th century, it wasn't due to invasion but economic disruption. Chinese maritime bands under the Ming dynasty starved its ports of trade, while the rise of Islamic sultanates offered local elites new networks unshackled from Hindu-Javanese cosmology. Majapahit didn't collapse, it evaporated, its influence dissipating like monsoon rain into the cultural soil of modern Indonesia. Today, its legacy is fiercely contested. Nationalists hail it as proof of a pre-colonial Indonesian unity, while scholars note the irony. An empire now celebrated as a national symbol was likely far less centralized than the modern republic that venerates it. Majapahit's true lesson isn't about borders, but about the fluid power of connection, how shared wealth and shared stories can bind islands more tightly than any army. While European empires measured wealth in gold and land, the Tai Tonga Empire built its dominion on something far more vital: the ocean itself. This wasn't just a kingdom, it was a celestial navigation network made flesh, where double-hulled canoes called laka-laka carried not just warriors but entire cosmologies across the Pacific. At its peak, the empire's influence stretched from Fiji to the Cook Islands, a maritime web held together by sacred kinship ties and the unwavering belief that its rulers descended directly from the gods. The heart of this seaborne realm pulsed in Ma, a capital unlike any other. Here, massive stone trilithons called Hamonga served as both astronomical calendars and political theater, gateways where the earthly and divine realms intersected. When a new Tai Tonga was crowned, he didn't simply take a throne. He underwent a ritual transformation, emerging as the living embodiment of Tangaloa, the creator deity who fished the islands from the sea. What set the Tai Tonga apart wasn't brute conquest, but a genius for weaving spiritual authority with practical control. Local chiefs across Polynesia pledged loyalty not out of fear, but because association with the Tai Tonga's divine lineage elevated their own status. The empire moved in cycles of mele ceremonial tribute and tapu sacred prohibitions, a delicate dance of reciprocity. Tribute canoes arrived laden with Samoan fine mats or Fijian sandalwood, symbols of connection rather than mere taxation. In return, the Tai Tonga redistributed these treasures during lavish festivals, reinforcing his role as the linchpin of cosmic order. Then came the Europeans, wielding gifts more destabilizing than muskets, iron, and Christianity. When Dutch explorers arrived in 1616, followed later by British missionaries, they unwittingly unleashed a spiritual crisis. Iron tools upended traditional craftsmanship, while Christian teachings eroded the divine foundation of Tai Tonga's power. By the 19th century, the empire had fractured into rival factions, its sacred capital reduced to a ceremonial backwater. The final blow came in 1865, when King George Tupu I officially separated church and state, stripping the Tai Tonga of political authority but preserving his sacred title, a hollow crown for a once mighty lineage. Yet the empire's true legacy isn't found in faded glory, but in living tradition. Modern Tonga's monarchy still traces its roots to the Tai Tonga line, and the art of celestial navigation, nearly lost to colonialism, is being revived by Pacific voyagers reconnecting with ancestral knowledge. The stones of Ma still stand, whispering of a time when an empire's borders weren't drawn on maps but charted by the stars. At the dawn of the 8th century, as Arab armies surged eastward claiming Persia and knocking at India's gates, an empire rose not just to resist but to redefine the subcontinent's destiny. The Gurjara Pratiharas, whose very name means protectors, didn't merely halt the Umayyad Caliphate's advance, they shattered its momentum in a way no Indian power had before. Picture the pivotal Battle of Rajasthan in 738 CE, where Nagabata I, a young king barely out of his teens, faced down a seasoned Arab general at the head of thousands of cavalry. The Umayyads, fresh from conquering Sind, expected another swift victory. Instead, Nagabata's forces, a mix of armored war elephants and mobile light infantry, used the desert terrain to funnel the invaders into killing zones. By battle's end, the remnants of the Arab army limped back to Multan, their dreams of pan-Indian conquest buried in the Thar sands. This victory wasn't just military, it was civilizational. For 3 centuries, the Pratiharas stood as India's bulwark, their capital at Kannauj becoming the prize every northern dynasty coveted. But their genius lay in blending martial prowess with cultural renaissance. Take their temple architecture, the sprawling Bechwar complex near Gwalior with its 200 sandstone shrines wasn't just a religious site, it was a political manifesto in stone. Each Shikara spire followed the Nagara style, but with a Pratihara twist, taller, more ornate, and inscribed with land grants to Brahmin communities. These weren't idle gifts, they bound priestly networks to the state, creating a web of loyalty stretching from the Ganges to the Aravalli Hills. Yet the dynasty's true innovation was agrarian. Facing constant Arab raids from the west, the Pratiharas re-engineered the countryside itself. Copper plate inscriptions detail how wastelands were converted into tax-exempt agrahara villages, gifted to scholars and soldiers who'd defend them. Advanced irrigation systems, stepwells like the Chand Bayori, with its 3,500 symmetrical steps, turned marginal lands into wheat and sugarcane belts. This wasn't just farming, it was frontier strategy. Every new village acted as a buffer, its militia-ready farmers doubling as a first line of defense. The irony, this empire that saved Hindu-Buddhist India from Islamic conquest ultimately fell not to external enemies, but to its own feudal cracks. By the 10th century, Rashtrakuta and Pala rivals chipped away at their borders, while ambitious governors like the Chandela clan declared independence. Yet their legacy endured in unexpected ways. The Pratihara military model, mobile cavalry combined with defensive agriculture, became the blueprint for Rajput kingdoms that resisted Mughals centuries later. Even their temple designs evolved into the iconic Maru Gurjara style seen at Mount Abu. History may have forgotten the Gurjara Pratihara's name, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the villages they fortified, the shrines they raised, and the India they shielded when the world seemed set on its conquest. Few ancient legal codes reveal a civilization's values as starkly as the contrast between Hammurabi's stele and the Hittite tablets. Where Babylon's famous laws demanded an eye for an eye, the Hittites preferred something revolutionary: scales of silver over spilled blood. Take a case of theft. Under Hammurabi's code, stealing from a temple or palace meant execution. The Hittites, a fine proportionate to the stolen goods, paid not just to the victim but to the palace as a form of judicial tax. Even manslaughter carried financial consequences. Rather than lethal retaliation, murderers paid hefty compensation to the victim's family, with amounts adjusted based on social status. This wasn't leniency, it was sophisticated social calculus. Every life retained economic value to the state, and every crime could be settled without losing productive citizens to the executioner's blade. The Hittites' approach to marriage and women's rights paints an even starker divergence. Babylonian women could be drowned for adultery, but Hittite laws recognized nuance. A wife caught with another man faced divorce and property penalties, not death. If a widow remarried, she retained her first husband's estate unless she bore children to her new spouse, a provision ensuring familial stability. Even more striking, Hittite women could initiate divorce under certain conditions, receiving custody of children and a share of household assets. These weren't isolated quirks but part of a broader legal philosophy emphasizing restitution over retribution, anticipating concepts modern courts wouldn't embrace for millennia. Archaeologists trace this legal DNA forward through Anatolia's turbulent history. When the Hittite Empire crumbled, their laws didn't vanish with the fall of Hattusa. Neo-Hittite city-states like Carchemish preserved elements of this system, blending it with Assyrian influences. Centuries later, Lycian tombstones from southwestern Turkey still reflected Hittite inheritance principles, granting daughters equal shares with sons, an anomaly in the patriarchal Mediterranean world. Even Roman-era Galatian contracts show traces of Hittite-style compensatory payments for property disputes, the real testament to their legacy. How quietly these ideas persisted without fanfare, woven into the fabric of everyday justice long after the empire's name faded from memory. What made the Hittites forge such a distinct path? Their position as cultural intermediaries offers clues. Sandwiched between Mesopotamia's rigid hierarchies and the more fluid tribal customs of the Caucasus, they absorbed both traditions while answering to neither. Survival demanded pragmatism. A multi-ethnic empire couldn't thrive on brutality alone. Their laws became the glue binding Hittites, Hurrians, and Luwians into a cohesive society, proving that legal innovation could be as powerful as any iron chariot in shaping history's course. Beneath the emerald canopy of Cambodia's jungles, the Khmer Empire engineered a metropolis so vast it dwarfed medieval London, and water was its secret weapon. Angkor wasn't just a collection of temples, it was a hydraulic wonder, a city threaded with canals and reservoirs so precise they functioned like the veins of a living organism. At its heart lay the West Baray, a man-made lake stretching 5 miles long and 1 mile wide, holding over 50 million cubic meters of water. But this wasn't merely a reservoir, it was a cosmological statement, mirroring the Hindu ocean of milk where gods churned creation itself. The Khmer didn't just tame water, they worshipped it, turning monsoons into a sustainable agricultural system that fed a population rivaling modern-day San Francisco. Recent LIDAR surveys have peeled back the jungle's green curtain, revealing an urban sprawl far beyond Angkor Wat's iconic spires. The scans show grid-like road networks, suburban clusters, and even neighborhood ponds, evidence of a decentralized city designed around water management. Each neighborhood had its own tank, channeling overflow into larger canals that fed the rice paddies encircling the urban core. This wasn't guesswork. The Khmer engineered gradients with astonishing precision, allowing water to flow downhill at just the right speed to prevent erosion while distributing nutrients. Archaeologists found ceramic jars embedded in canal walls, acting as ancient pressure regulators to control flow. The genius of Angkor's system lay in its redundancy. When the Tonle Sap Lake flooded annually, reverse flow canals captured the nutrient-rich backwash, creating natural fertilizer for dry season crops. Smaller reservoirs called trepang dotted the landscape, ensuring no field lay more than a kilometer from water. Even the temple moat served dual purposes: sacred symbols of the cosmic sea and practical water storage basins. This intricate web turned Cambodia's unpredictable monsoons into a predictable agricultural clock, allowing 3 rice harvests per year where one was once a struggle. Yet the very system that sustained Angkor may have hastened its decline. Sediment cores tell a grim tale. Deforestation from urban expansion clogged canals with eroded soil, while over-engineered waterways disrupted natural drainage. By the 14th century, prolonged droughts revealed in tree ring studies pushed the hydraulic network past its breaking point. The Khmer elite, perhaps too confident in their mastery of water, had built a civilization perfectly adapted to a climate that no longer existed. What lingers isn't just the ghostly imprint of canals beneath the soil, but a lesson in humility. The Khmer didn't fail because they lacked skill. They failed because their brilliance blinded them to nature's limits. Modern cities from Bangkok to Phoenix now face similar water dilemmas, making Angkor's ruins not just a relic but a mirror. The haunting beauty of Ta Proham's tree-strangled stones isn't just a testament to lost glory. It's a warning written in roots and stone. The Garamantes underground tunnels were engineering marvels, but their true cost remained hidden until recently, buried not in sand, but in economic pressures from an empire hundreds of miles away. New sediment core studies from Libya's Fazan Basin reveal a startling pattern. The aquifers feeding their fagaras didn't just dwindle from overuse, they were drained at an alarming rate during peaks of Roman slave demand. Here's how it happened. Each captured laborer sent north meant fewer hands to maintain the delicate tunnel systems, while the gold and wine flowing south financed reckless expansion. Elite Garamantes, thirsty for Mediterranean luxuries, ordered deeper digs into ancient groundwater reserves, chasing short-term wealth over long-term survival. Archaeologists now trace this tragedy through layers of silt. In wells abandoned by the 3rd century CE, sediment spikes show sudden collapses precisely when Roman tax records detail surges in Ethiopian slave imports. The math is grim. Maintaining 1 kilometer of fagara required constant labor to clear debris and reinforce walls. With young workers shackled and shipped overseas, tunnels clogged, reservoirs evaporated, and the empire's lifeblood seeped back into the earth. Even their famed public baths, symbols of desert defiance, cracked dry under the weight of their own ambition. The parallels to modern water crises are uncomfortably precise. Like Saudi Arabia's drained fossil aquifers or California's sinking farmlands, the Garamantes exploited non-renewable resources to feed external markets until the balance tipped. Their most lucrative export, human lives, ironically starved the systems that sustained them. Today, satellite images of Libya's Wadi al-Ajal show ghostly circles of dead palm groves, their irrigation channels still visible like scars. These aren't just ancient ruins, they're a cautionary ledger where every drop of water traded for short-term gain carried the price of a civilization's future. What lingers isn't just a tale of ecological hubris, but a question about complicity. Roman mosaics flaunting exotic desert warriors never mentioned the collapsing water tables behind their capture. The Garamantes, like modern economies tethered to unsustainable exports, became prisoners of their own trade networks. Their story whispers a warning we're still learning. No empire, no matter how ingenious, can outlast the reckless arithmetic of borrowed time and stolen water. The Aztecs didn't just admire the Toltecs, they weaponized their legacy, stitching together myths and half-truths to spin a golden genealogy connecting their upstart empire to these revered ancestors. When the Mexica first arrived in the Valley of Mexico as outsiders, they were dismissed as barbarians, their capital of Tenochtitlan a swampy backwater. But by the time Moctezuma II greeted Cortés, he ruled as the heir of a divine lineage stretching back to Tolan, the fabled Toltec capital. This wasn't just ancestor worship, it was political theater on an epic scale. Aztec scribes meticulously crafted codices showing their rulers descended from Toltec royalty, while poets composed verses lauding the Toltecatl, a term that came to mean not just a citizen of Tolan, but anyone possessing wisdom, artistry, or moral excellence. The message was clear: the Aztecs weren't conquerors, they were restorers, bringing back a lost golden age. Archaeology reveals the sleight of hand behind these claims. While Aztec art obsessively copied Toltec motifs, serpent columns, chacmuls, and warrior reliefs, their version of Tolan bore little resemblance to the modest ruins at Chola. Excavations show the real Tolan was a regional power, not the glittering metropolis described in Aztec chronicles. The so-called Toltec innovations the Aztecs bragged about inheriting, from featherworking to the cult of Quetzalcoatl, were often Mesoamerican traditions centuries older than the Toltecs themselves. Even the famous exile of Quetzalcoatl, the priest-king whose return the Aztecs feared Cortés embodied, may have been a blend of myth and half-remembered history. The genius of Aztec propaganda lay not in accuracy but in audacity. They didn't just borrow Toltec prestige, they remade it into a mirror reflecting their own ambitions. The manipulation went deeper than royal bloodlines. Aztec rulers staged elaborate discoveries of Toltec relics, planting artifacts like the Tizoc stone in strategic locations to prove their divine mandate. Priests choreographed rituals where Aztec kings donned Toltec costumes, reenacting mythic coronations. Even their wars were framed as righteous campaigns to reclaim Toltec lands, never mind that those territories had changed hands a dozen times since Chola's fall. This myth-making wasn't unique to the Aztecs. Post-classic Maya kings at Chichen Itza had earlier claimed Toltec ties to bolster their rule. But the Aztecs industrialized the practice, turning Tolan into a blank canvas where every brushstroke served their narrative. The irony: this fabricated past became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By modeling themselves after an idealized Toltec legacy, one they'd largely invented, the Aztecs inadvertently shaped their own downfall. When Cortés appeared off the coast in 1519, Moctezuma hesitated, haunted by prophecies of Quetzalcoatl's return. The very myths that legitimized Aztec power now paralyzed their emperor, a testament to how thoroughly fiction had fused with reality. Long after Tenochtitlan's fall, the Toltec mirage endured, woven so deeply into Mexican identity that even today, politicians and artists invoke their name as shorthand for cultural authenticity. The Aztecs may have manipulated history, but in the end, their greatest illusion was making the world believe it too. Few battlefield maneuvers have been as psychologically devastating or as enduring as the Parthian shot. Named for Empire 25's mastery of the tactic, this lethal ballet of feigned retreats and pinpoint archery didn't just win battles, it rewrote the rules of engagement for centuries of cavalry warfare. Picture the scene: Parthian horse archers clad in lightweight scale armor would charge headlong toward enemy lines, their composite bows drawn. Then, at the last possible moment, they'd wheel their nimble-step ponies seemingly in panic, galloping away in disarray. To an uninitiated foe like Rome's legions at Carrhae, it appeared to be a rout, but as the pursuing infantry or cavalry stretched their formations thin, the retreating riders would twist backward in their saddles, loosing arrows with terrifying accuracy over their horses' hindquarters. The effect was chaos. Tight ranks dissolved into panicked clusters, shields useless against plunging shots from above. The brilliance of the Parthian shot lay in its exploitation of perception. Most ancient armies equated retreat with weakness, conditioning their soldiers to chase a fleeing enemy. The Parthians weaponized this instinct. Their horses, smaller but far more agile than the heavy chargers of the Mediterranean, could pivot on a dime, maintaining perfect balance even at full gallop. Each rider carried two types of arrows, lighter ones for long-range harassment and armor-piercing bodkin points for closer kills, but the real mastery was in the timing. The feigned retreat wasn't a wild flight. It was a controlled unraveling, luring enemies just far enough from their own lines to be encircled by reserve cavalry waiting in the wings. This tactic's influence stretched far beyond Parthian borders. The Mongols refined it into their Mangudai units, whose mock retreats at battles like Songhai lured Hungarian knights into deadly traps. Ottoman Sipahis employed similar methods against Crusader armies, their lighter horsemen outmaneuvering European heavy cavalry. Even the Mughals adapted it in India, where horse archers used the Dana technique to pick off war elephants from a seeming withdrawal. What made the Parthian shot so timeless wasn't just its lethality, but its adaptability, a fluid dance of deception that could be tailored to deserts, steppes, or forests. Yet the tactic's success hinged on more than just skilled archers. It required an entire cultural ecosystem. Parthian boys learned to ride and shoot almost as soon as they could walk, their spines curving slightly from years of twisting to fire backward. Their horses, bred for endurance and trained to respond to knee pressure alone, left riders' hands free for archery. Even the empire's decentralized structure played a role. Local nobles prided themselves on supplying elite cavalry units, fostering competition that elevated standards. When Rome's legions finally developed counters like the testudo formation or auxiliary mounted archers, the Parthians simply adjusted, mixing in heavier cataphracts to break static defenses. The ultimate irony, while the Parthian Empire faded into history, its signature maneuver outlasted it by a millennium. Medieval knights, Napoleonic dragoons, and even modern armored vehicle tactics still echo its principles: the feint, the counterstrike, the exploitation of overextension. Some legacies aren't carved in stone, but written in the swirling dust of retreating hooves, a lesson in how illusion can be deadlier than steel. We often think of ancient empires as relics of a distant past, but their collapses whisper warnings that feel unsettlingly modern. The Khmer's hydraulic overreach mirrors today's drought-stricken megacities. The Garamantes aquifer depletion parallels California's vanishing water tables. Even the Hittites, masters of iron, succumbed to climate shifts and supply chain disruptions that could sound lifted from a 21st century crisis report. These weren't just falls, they were slow-motion unravelings where environmental stress, economic fragility, and political miscalculation converged, a playbook we're now rereading with growing unease. Consider the parallels. Just as the Romans' demand for Saharan slaves drained the Garamantes' life-giving fagaras, modern supply chains stretch thin, linking smartphone factories to conflict minerals and fast fashion to dying rivers. The Indus Valley's cities likely fell when monsoon patterns shifted today. Rising seas threaten Miami and Mumbai alike. Even the Mongol invasion that shattered Khwarezm's scholarly utopia finds echoes in cyber warfare, where a single hack can cripple a nation's infrastructure. History's greatest lesson isn't that empires fall, but how their vulnerabilities were never unique, just magnified by scale. Yet there's hope in these ruins. The Maya rebounded after collapse by decentralizing power. The Songhai's manuscripts, though scattered, preserved knowledge for future generations. Resilience often lies not in avoiding disaster, but in diversification and adaptation, principles as vital for modern cities as they were for Ankara or Timbuktu. Perhaps that's why these forgotten empires matter. They force us to confront our own fragility while offering blueprints for endurance. Now we turn to you. Which of these fallen giants left you awestruck? Was it the Kushite pharaohs who ruled Egypt, the Maritime Srivijaya with its golden temples, or the Toltec mythmakers who shaped civilizations they'd never meet? Drop your thoughts below. We'll highlight the most surprising answers in future videos. And if today's journey sparked your curiosity, explore deeper with the books and documentaries linked in the description. After all, history's greatest stories aren't just about remembering empires, they're about understanding the threads that connect their fates to ours. Thanks for joining this expedition into the shadows of the past, where every ruin has a lesson if we're willing to listen.